Are you looking for a place to plant new roots? Or maybe this is the year you finally decide to uproot yourself and move to a new state. Either way, you'd be in the minority, as most Americans actually want to stay put. Yeah, while the pandemic inspired a mass exodus from big cities to smaller cities and towns in 2020, things really slowed down in 2021 with the least amount of people changing residences in nearly 75 years. But who cares about that? Because it's 2022 now, which means new year, new move. And if you're like this cow who wants to move but has no idea where to start, well, there's gotta be a reason everyone's moving to the states on this list. So let's move on to the 10 states that everyone is moving to in 2022. And let's hit 5,000 likes if you want to see a video on the states that Americans are leaving in 2022. Number 10. Rhode Island. Rhode Island may be the smallest state by total area, but most of that land must be pretty desirable, as it also has the second highest population density. Now, this one literally came out of nowhere, as people had been fleeing the ocean state for years, and most of the states that people moved to in 2021 were among the least densely populated. But with beautiful beaches, no crime, and tons of charming historic towns, Rhode Island's pretty underrated, especially since the economy is booming. The median household income grew by 8.7% just this past year to $71,200. So it makes sense that 36% of newcomers moved here for a job. And over half of newcomers are also making more than $150,000 a year. So while the median home value of $398,000 isn't exactly cheap, it's likely not an issue for them. Plus, it's still a heck of a lot cheaper than neighboring Massachusetts, where the vast majority of new residents moved from. But even though 59.1% of total moves here in 2021 were inbound migration, the population of nearly 1.1 million actually decreased by 0.2% due to natural decrease, aka when the total number of deaths is greater than the amount of new births. Number 9. Idaho.
What? But you keep telling us Idaho's the fastest growing state. How come it's only number 9?
Well, you see, it is the fastest growing state with an estimated population increase of 3.4% just this past year. But since most of the people moving in are coming from states with much higher incomes like California and Washington, the cost of living has also skyrocketed to the point where it's just no longer affordable for locals. Now, sure, the economy is growing fast too, with 7.8% wage growth last year. But it's not growing near fast enough, as the median household income is still only $61,000, while the median home cost ballooned by 34% over the past 12 months to $452,000. So while the sheer amount of new residents might make you think Idaho would be higher on the list, just 60.4% of total moves in the gem state last year were inbound migration, as many locals were also forced to leave. But can you really blame people who can afford it for wanting to live here? Boise's pretty much the definition of a perfect city. There is so much beautiful untouched nature, and it's the third safest state. Number 8. Oregon. Idaho's coastal neighbor just barely eked out a higher spot on this list, with 60.5% of total moves in the state being inbound migration. But while almost no one moved to Idaho for jobs, 44% of new Oregon residents said their primary reason for moving was for a job, which is understandable considering the thriving economy in the Silicon Forest, aka the Portland, Beaverton, Hillsborough area, where the median household income is a whopping $78,500. And while the media likes to paint the place as if it's an Antifa war zone, if you avoid downtown, Portland is still as artsy as ever, with so much character and literally the best food and beer in the country. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if people moved there solely for the food. It's that good. And no matter where in Oregon you move to, you'll be surrounded by stunning scenery. From the Rogue River Valley to the volcanoes in Crater Lake to the Painted Hills, magically rugged coastline, and so many waterfalls, the Beaver State is one of the most geographically diverse. Sure, it's also gotten expensive with a median home cost of $486,000. But compared to California or Washington, where over half of the newcomers are moving from, it's actually pretty affordable. Number 7. Tennessee. With a violent crime rate 506% above the national average, Memphis just surpassed St. Louis for the title of most dangerous city in America. And Tennessee overall is the third most dangerous state. Heck, even Nashville, the one actual good place to live here with a great economy, has a violent crime rate 200% above the national average. But that hasn't stopped people from moving here in droves, as 62% of total moves in the state last year were inbound ones, resulting in an overall population growth of 0.9%. Then again, considering that nearly 40% of newcomers said they moved here for the lifestyle or to retire, maybe they're all just adrenaline junkies who love the feeling of danger, because the state is also smack dab in the middle of the new Tornado Alley. Or maybe they just like the Great Smoky Mountains. Yeah, that one probably makes more sense, since most of the people moving here are coming from Florida or Texas, which are both pretty flat. And while the median home cost of $264,000 may seem somewhat affordable compared to most of the country, it's also going up fast, while the median household income is still just $56,000 with very little economic opportunity outside of Nashville. But hey, at least there's no state income tax. Number 6. Alabama. Alabama consistently makes our worst states to live in lists. So why in the world is it the 6th most moved to state? Well, considering that 45.4% of people who moved here said they did so for a job, the answer is Huntsville. That's right, the one city in Alabama that doesn't suck is actually a pretty great place to live with a diversified economy and a median household income of $67,000, which might be just slightly above the US average of $65,000, but compared to the statewide median household income of just $51,000, it's incredible. And considering that many of the states people are moving here from are even more impoverished, like Louisiana or Mississippi, for them, even the rest of Alabama probably doesn't seem that bad. But if you're not from Louisiana or Mississippi, don't be fooled by the cheap cost of living, because it's not worth the years that living here will take off your life. Alabama actually has the second lowest life expectancy at just 74.9 years, which makes sense as it also has the third highest obesity rate and fourth worst healthcare outcomes. So even though 62.1% of total moves in the state last year were inbound migration, the overall population growth was just 0.3% due to natural decrease. Number 5. Florida. Considering how many people are moving to Florida, it may very well be the next Texas, because 62.3% of total moves in the state last year were inbound migration, resulting in a population growth of 1.1%, despite it already being the third largest state with nearly 22 million residents. But while most newcomers to Texas moved for the affordable cost of living and booming economies of the cities, people of all ages and walks of life are moving to the Sunshine State for all sorts of reasons. One of which may be that despite the ongoing pandemic, Florida has remained open with life largely unchanged throughout 2021. Now, this could be a pro or con depending on your views, but either way, 27% of newcomers said they moved here for the lifestyle, while 39% said they moved here to retire. And who wouldn't want to live out their best years with year-round warm weather, great multicultural cities, and nearly 1,000 miles of pristine white sand beaches? Especially since the majority of new residents are coming from New York, where the cost of living is much higher, the winters are much colder, and the restrictions are much more strict. Number 4. West Virginia.
Wait, isn't West Virginia the fastest shrinking state? How the heck did it make this list?
Okay, so yeah, West Virginia had been the fastest shrinking state for most of the past decade, but a huge part of that was due to natural decrease. What can I say? West Virginians just aren't having kids, and the increasingly aging population is, well, increasingly aging, while also not living very long, with the average life expectancy under 75 years. And sure, people had also been fleeing the state due to high poverty and literally no economic opportunity. But that's also made it dirt cheap, with by far the lowest median home values in the nation at just $122,000. So since the nature here is still as gorgeous as ever, many outdoors lovers who can work remotely have finally started moving in. Especially since other mountain states like Colorado, Utah, or New Hampshire have gotten ridiculously expensive. So while West Virginia was still the 7th fastest shrinking state in 2021 with a net population loss of 0.6%, 63% of statewide moves were actually inbound ones. And I wouldn't be surprised if that trend continues throughout the next decade as more and more people discover the place. In fact, Lonely Planet just ranked West Virginia as its number 2 travel destination in the world for 2022. Number 3, South Carolina. South Carolina is exploding. Well, not literally, but last year it had the third highest percentage of inbound migration at 63.3% of total moves, and it was the fourth fastest growing state overall with a net population gain of 1.4%. Just because a lot of people are moving somewhere, however, does not necessarily make it a great place to live, as the quality of life as a whole here just isn't very good outside of Hilton Head or Charleston, which, to be fair, is a great small city. Both of those places have gotten really expensive though, and while the Greenville and Columbia areas are also decent enough, there's a huge division of wealth between the cities, which are open to change, and the rural parts of the state, which are severely impoverished. As such, South Carolina's actually among the bottom 10 states in most categories that matter, including having the 9th highest poverty rate, 7th worst schools, and 5th highest crime rate. But if you don't need a job, can't afford Florida, and are just looking to join the 36.6% of newcomers who moved here to retire, Myrtle Beach is one of the most affordable beach towns in the country. Number 2, South Dakota. If you've never been to South Dakota, you're probably wondering why so many people are moving to a seemingly uneventful state in the middle of nowhere, with 68.6% of total moves here being inbound migration. But if you have ever visited the home of the Black Hills and Badlands, you can probably see why. Sure, it's rarely talked about, but objectively, the Mount Rushmore state is a great place to live. Sioux Falls is one of the best small cities with great affordability and a booming economy. So it makes sense that 32.6% of newcomers moved here for a job. And considering that the state is the 5th least densely populated with so much breathtaking nature, in addition to also being pretty darn cheap with no state income tax and a median home value of just $264,000, it's no surprise that 46% of new residents said their primary reason for moving here was for the lifestyle, to retire, or for a lower cost of living. Now, before we get to number 1, make sure you leave a like and subscribe and comment which state you would want to move to the most, even if it's not on this list.
But without further ado,
Number 1, Vermont. Despite Vermonters' best efforts to keep it a secret, the Green Mountain State has been the most moved to state for 5 years running, with an astounding 74.3% of total moves in 2021 being inbound migration. But what can I say? Once people move here and experience the incredibly high quality of life, they don't leave. And I don't blame them. The scenery is immaculate, there are so many wonderful small towns, and Burlington has an incredible economy. But if you watched my top 10 reasons why everyone is moving to Vermont video, you already knew that. And if you haven't watched it, then go watch it, because who knows, maybe you're gonna want to join all the newcomers who will likely yet again make Vermont the most moved to state of 2022.